Well, again, happy Easter. It I told those who could make it on Good Friday that Good Friday is my favorite day of the year because of how unique it is. But part of the reason why Good Friday is called Good Friday is because we do know that Sunday came. So here we are. um, Good Friday does teach us to sit in suffering. It teaches us to sit in that agony, not knowing that Sunday's coming in real time. But we do know in the back of our heads, having lived it out, that here we are on Sunday. To recap Holy Week again, you had Pilate come in on a war horse with his soldiers on the western side of Jerusalem. You had Jesus coming in on a donkey on the eastern side of Jerusalem. And they enter the city on Holy Week. And Judas most likely tries to light off a revolution on essentially what was the Jewish July 4th. And instead, he gets Jesus arrested and condemned. And when he finds out Jesus is condemned, he hates what has happened. He wanted Jesus to be that warhorse figure. But Jesus isn't. He comes in peace. He comes in love. And he comes in forgiveness. And as the world murders God, he prays that they would be forgiven. He loves them. And he dies on the cross. He goes into the tomb on Saturday. And here we come to Sunday, where they find an empty tomb. And they come to find out what some of this plan actually was. But before we get there today, I want to go back. We looked on Friday at the last 7 words of Jesus. I want to go back to the next to last words of Jesus that we looked at. It's the last words that John records Jesus saying. And it is Jesus on the cross. And he says, "It is completed." I want to pick that up this morning and consider, what did he complete? What does that mean for our Easter day? What does this mean? And how does it impact Easter morning? And so to answer this, we are going to turn to the Gospel of John. As we've looked at John's writings several times, we found that John is eloquent. He doesn't waste any details that are meaningless. His details build on each other. His details mean something for where he's going. And so I want to consider where John started this whole thing. Where does he start his gospel? Because it helps to know kind of where are we supposed to end. And in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, and then verse 14, John says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was fully God. The Word was with God in the beginning. All things were created by him, and apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. In him was life, and the life was the light of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not mastered it." Jumping to verse 14, we then learn, "Now the Word became flesh and took up residence among us." John starts his gospel with putting us in the creation mindset. He takes us back to the Garden of Eden, to initial creation, to paradise, a place where all is right with the world. God's creating. It's beautiful. Humanity and God are in harmony. And then things fell into disarray. But he takes us there to creation when he starts his book out. He sets the tone for his gospel. From there, he carries us forward to Jesus' arrival. And he tells us that the same Word that started everything is now coming into creation. Through John's subsequent telling of the life of Jesus, John shows us that Jesus, The creating power since the start of time is setting creation right again. To borrow from John's book of Revelation, John is telling us in his gospel about how Jesus is making all things new. Of note, leading up to Jesus' crucifixion and his passion, what we call the passion, where he's tormented and tortured, the last three signs of Jesus is first, he walks on water in the darkness of night. Takes us back to when Jesus as the Word was over the waters of the beginning. The next sign of Jesus is that he takes dirt and he creates functioning eyes with it. Taking us back to when God was forming with dirt. And finally, the last sign of Jesus was when he gives life to Lazarus. Going then back to the final culminating moment of creation, where humanity is given the breath of life. There's a system of creation happening again. So immediately leading up to Jesus' crucifixion, there's three key moments in the human creation history that Jesus redoes over again. He's present over the water. He creates again from the dirt. And he gives humanity life. He's at work creating, just like he did so long ago. And what comes next is in John's gospel as he carries us forward to the crucifixion. What we find in the crucifixion is that in the first garden, Adam and Eve end up realizing they're naked, hiding behind a tree, defeated by shame. And John says we have a Messiah, we have a Savior who's come, and he also is stripped naked. But he doesn't cower behind a tree. He is put on display on a tree. And it's there that he will conquer shame. He's reversing the plight of humanity. And as thorns became the sign of a broken creation back in the book of Genesis, Jesus takes the thorns upon his head. He is literally taking upon himself broken creation as he goes on the cross. And as we consider on Good Friday, Jesus takes upon himself the final, all-encompassing sin, the murder of God. With this in mind, we've come to the words we started today's message with in John 19:30, when Jesus had received the sour wine. Jesus said, "It is completed." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. His work was done. What was completed? It was Jesus' creation work. John wanted his readers to know that the creating power from the beginning had come into the world to create. And Jesus' words, "it is completed," calls us back to Genesis. When it's recorded that God looked at all he had done and it was good. And Genesis records his work was completed. And so I've considered, where does this bring us on Easter morning? Here's where we arrive. Here's what happens on Easter morning. Here's the dynamic we can appreciate on Easter morning. Here's the amazing thing about Easter. The first creation started with humanity in a garden and ended with them being pushed out. Jesus' new creation happens from outside a garden, remaking humanity, and brings them back into a garden. He brings them home. And here's where we get to John's telling of the Easter story. John 19:38 through 42. We'll begin to read the Easter story. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders, asked Pilate if he could remove the body of Jesus off of the cross. Pilate gave him permission, so he went and took the body away. Nicodemus, the man who had previously come to Jesus at night, accompanied Joseph, carrying a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing approximately 75 pounds. Then they took Jesus' body and wrapped it with the aromatic spices in strips of linen cloth, according to Jewish burial customs. Now, at the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden was a new tomb where no one had yet been buried. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation and the tomb was nearby, they placed Jesus' body there. Jesus, as God, as creator, had finished his work. He says it is completed. And what does he do next? He rests on the seventh day, just like he did in Genesis after he created. Jesus as God rests. Jesus the man, the new Adam, is then placed back in the garden as well. They take him off of the cross and he returns to the garden. So God is resting and Adam is in the garden. Let's continue the resurrection story. In John chapter 20, going on through verses 1 through 18. Now, very early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been moved away from the entrance. So she went running to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved and told them, "They have taken the Lord from the tomb and we don't know where they've put him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out to go to the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter. This disciple is the one who is actually writing this book. And I love that he has to point out, I ran faster. I ran faster than Peter. So the disciple ran faster than Peter and reached the tomb first. Then Simon Peter, who had been following him, arrived and went right in the tomb. He saw the strips of linen cloth lying there and the face cloth which had been around Jesus' head. Not lying with the strips of linen cloth, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, came in, and he saw and believed. I love how he has to say, yes, Peter went in first, but then the other disciple who did reach it first, he then did go ahead and go in, and he believed. What did they believe, though? They believed Mary's report that the body had been taken. Because the next verse says, he saw and believed, for they did not yet understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. So they believed that the body had been taken. So the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood outside the tomb weeping. As she wept, she bent down and looked into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting where Jesus' body had been lying, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Mary replied, "They have taken my Lord away, and I do not know where they have put him." When she had said this, she turned and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus then said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" Because she thought he was the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will take him." Jesus then said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus replied, "Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. Go to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene came and informed the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them what Jesus had said to her. Two disciples make a quick appearance in John's telling of this. But the primary subject of the resurrection story is Mary. Here's a woman back in the garden, just like in creation. The angels are no longer keeping her out like they did with Eve. Having reversed creation, Jesus then asks Mary, "Who are you looking for?" Eve was a woman who had to hide from God because she was in shame and sin. She was avoiding God way back then. But now Mary is a woman who's shame-free. She's in the garden, and now she gets to seek God. Mary also mistakes Jesus as the gardener. And this is a callback, I believe, a connection to Adam, who was placed in the garden to tend it. Adam was the first gardener. The comparisons between first creation and new creation could go on. But we'll leave it there. On this Easter morning, what I want to consider is the significance this brings to the resurrection. With the resurrection of Jesus on that Sunday morning so long ago, a new creation was inaugurated. A creation where God had absorbed, disarmed, defeated sin, shame, death, and all its forces through his love and forgiveness. What was inaugurated was a creation that brought an open garden of God to the whole world. A creation with ready access now to God and life. Does this mean, though, that everything's perfect? At this point, obviously not. But it does mean that in the middle of all that is wrong in the world, all the wrongs we suffer through our lives, from injustices to illnesses, and even the wrongs that we ourselves commit, even in the middle of all of that, it means that suffering and death is not the end anymore. As one theologian put it, the resurrection means that the worst thing is never the last thing. We've been led back to the garden of God, the garden of life, never to hide behind a tree again. Invited like Mary on the first Easter morning to boldly live in the garden now and to seek a renewed life with God. So here's Mary on the first Easter Sunday, a woman in a patriarchal culture, getting to be the first person to realize this new creation. And as Genesis named Eve the mother of all the living, Mary then becomes the first one to carry the message of new life out of the spiritual garden that Jesus has brought us back to. It's a message that would go out from Mary Magdalene to then the whole world. So welcome to the garden.